Hey, we should do something fun with Photoshop. You know what's fun? Candy. So let's make a picture creating some small pieces of candy like M&Ms, Skittles, Reese's Pieces, or it could be just a plain candy that you want to put your own logo on. Pretty easy process. So let's go ahead and begin. The canvas size here is 1920 by 1080 pixels. You can make it whatever size you want to, just in case, for scalability if you want yours to be similar. And the first thing that I want to do is go to my ellipse tool, and I want to put multiple pieces of candy on this eventually. So I'm going to make it small, and that way I can fit more pieces of candy on there. The more, the merrier. So here to begin with, I'm going to say to begin with here, I'm going to go with a red M&M. Have my circle drawn on there with my shape tool. Now, if you want to, I could just call it shell, for example, the candy shell. And let's double click on that in the layer panel to open up our layer style. First item in there that I want to do is inner glow. So if I select inner glow, one of the options in there is the blend mode, and I have it right now at soft light and opacity 100%. You can see it gives it a little bit of a roundness look to it. I do have black for the color, so your default color is going to be white. I want it to be black, so it's kind of weird to think of it as an inner glow, but we're using black for it. And then for the elements, I have it around the edges, and the choke is 40% and the size is 30%. Sometimes you might be creating a color for your candy and soft light doesn't look very good. So what you can do is you could try overlay if you want. As you can see, overlay doesn't make a huge difference in here, but in some instances it will. And you can also go to darken. Now obviously darken, you can see it makes it really dark, so then you're going to have to lower that opacity around the outside a little bit. And that works just as good. I think like with orange, possibly in yellow, and a few of the other colors of M&Ms, you may have to use that darken blend mode. But for right now, I'm going to roll with that soft light at 100%. I think it looks nice. Once we have that done, then we can click OK. And if we're in that layer style, we can then go and select drop shadow. Drop shadow here, I have the blend mode as normal, and I drop the opacity down to 30%. The distance, normally I say don't put a big distance if you're using drop shadow, because you don't like your object looking like it's floating above the paper. But in this case, there's some depth to the candy, so I have a little bit of space in there. And then spread is at 0, and size 9 or 10 works pretty good. The angle's up to you, depending on where you want the light to look like it's coming from. I might actually switch that angle of that shadow to look like it's down in this corner. Alright, then once that is done, we can click OK to close out of our layer style. And we need to then go to our ellipse tool. I'm going to make an ellipse and make it more of an oval instead of a circle this time. And the color for right now doesn't really matter a whole lot. I just don't want it to be white because I want to be able to see it here, and I don't want it to be red because I want to be able to see it when I move it over the candy. I will use Control T and hold Shift as I rotate this to move that at a 45-degree angle. And once we have that done, then we're going to place it above the candy to where it's kind of in that, if there was an upper right hand corner of a circle, that's where it would be. Alright, we can duplicate that layer, and we will. Click OK. And then with this one, if we Control T and then resize it, try to keep it scaled. And you can use those arrow keys on your keyboard to fine-tune that position if needed and have it spaced about evenly. Alright, that looks good as far as the size. The color looks horrible. So we need to go into the layer style for these. Doesn't matter which one. I just selected my first ellipse and double-clicked on it to open up the layer style. And find where it says fill opacity. We want to drop down the fill opacity to hide the color, and as long as we leave the regular opacity at 100, then it'll still see our layer style changes that we make. Then I want to go to gradient overlay. Now gradient overlay here, the first option here, maybe 70% for the opacity for right now. And if I go here to where it says gradient and I select on this, you should have an option in here that goes from white to transparent. If yours doesn't show that, then you'll need to click OK and OK and then select it so that your colors over here match the same to whatever color you want it to be, and then you can go back into the layer style and make that change. So I'll click OK there. And if yours also on here, I have the scale as 100 and I have the style as radial, and I have it so that it's lighter in the middle than on the outside, so you can toggle it with that reverse on there. You may need to move around the actual gradient. So if I have this layer style open, I can click and drag and it'll move that gradient within the confines of that shape that I placed over that piece of candy. So I'm just trying to avoid any awkward lines that are on there to give it more of a round appearance, I guess. And I think that looks pretty good. As my graphic design teacher would say, you know, zoom in, pixel perfect is this thing, pixel perfect. Then after that, we can go into the other layer style of the other ellipse. Drop down that fill opacity to 0 and go to gradient overlay. This one here, I'm going to try 60. 60 doesn't look bad. 55, I think I am going to leave it at 60. And as far as how it's aligned on there, I think it's pretty good. I may need to move it just a little bit. And if you need to, you may need to drop that scale down on that one to maybe like 99%, you know, give or take. That looks pretty good, I think. It's the same color and everything else, so I can click OK. Alright, that's starting to look like a piece of candy. Now, once I have those done, I can move this in the middle here, center it so it doesn't look so awkward to you while you're watching. And the last thing for this piece of candy is our type tool. I'll select it. I found this typeface called Aachen or Aachen, A-A-C-H-E-N, online. I found it, and so it's not an exact match, but it's pretty darn close. So, you know, you can kind of look around online, and like I said, you might be using your own logo for this. So if that's the case, then you don't have to worry if it looks like an M&M or a Skittle or whatever. But that looks pretty decent. The letter is a little bit bold, so if you want to, you can drop that opacity a little bit. I wouldn't go much below 85 for opacity. I think that works pretty well. And to make it look like it was, you know, kind of painted on there, or however they do that. And there is your candy. Now, once you have that done, you can select those layers, and if you go down to create a new group, it puts them all in a folder. Then I can just call this one red. Alright, and now what I can do is just duplicate that group, right click on it, go over to duplicate, click OK. And if I move this one over here and expand that group, I can go to that shell, and if I select on it over here in the appearance underneath the properties tab, and click on that, and I can make it a blue. And as you can see, blue, that blending style that we used with the red, looks pretty good on there with that soft light. So that's nice. If you want to rotate this, you know, instead of rotating the whole group, because then you're going to have these light reflections or glares or whatever you want to call them moving, I think it's cool to have them facing the same way, because then it's like your light source is coming from the same spot, and it corresponds a little bit with like if the light's shining over here and then we got the shadow down here, that makes a little bit more sense to me. But what I can do is I can select the M layer, Control T it, and just rotate the letter M, and that works very nicely. So that one's there. I'm going to call this one blue, and then one more time I'll duplicate a group, doesn't matter which one at this point, and with this one here, then rotate the letter a little bit and select the shell and find a color that you like. So this one here, if I have that one selected, then what I would do is I would go into the inner glow of that layer, switch that from soft light to darken or normal, either one, and then I'm going to bring down that opacity down to about 15, so that way you get kind of a look of what it's like with those other colors. Hopefully this is something that was fun to make, gives you something to play around with and experiment with. I appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.